The night the sky turned green over the bay. Everything I had been keeping down for years rose to the surface like cold air through a crack in the earth. The six of us were ringed around a driftwood fire at the edge of the dunes. Beyond the dark spit of land, Tillamook Bay lay as still as polished glass. A few fishing boats winked in the distance. Someone passed a thermos along. On the radio at the bait shop that afternoon, they had said a strong solar storm might push auroras far enough south that even Oregon could get a taste. That was the excuse to drag blankets and coolers to the beach. What kept us there? Well past the chill and the jokes and the last ember, was more private. We were all 30-something or just past. Jobs and exes and mortgages. Most grew up here. I did not. I had moved away and returned the way some people circle back to a childhood photograph they can't throw out. The sky was still black when I started talking. It doesn't matter what questions set me off. Someone asked about the ranch outside Forest Grove. I heard my voice answer, thin as it was, and then I was telling the truth out loud for the first time in 10 years. My grandmother raised me. I said, but my parents didn't die. They were taken. I expected laughs. I got a faint scuff of shoes in the sand. A couple of heads turned. Paige, wrapped in an army green jacket and 2 scarves, kept her eyes on me. She didn't blink much when something mattered. My parents ran a small land surveying outfit out by Gales Creek. I said, we moved there when I was 10. My dad loved maps the way other men love teams or engines. He would spread plats across the kitchen table at night, the coffee ring marking the Tualatin Range like a new moon. He used to say that if you listen long enough, you could hear certain hills breathe. He meant it as a joke, I think. It had been late summer then, too. My mother wanted a couple of goats and a horse, the kind of idea that comes with a wide porch and a view. The horse was named Smoke, a gray with a white star. One windy evening, my father came in from the ridge with his hat in his hands and said Smoke had broken the latch and wandered off. They went looking with flashlights. They told me to finish dinner and brush my teeth. I obeyed. I tried reading in bed. The wind pushed through the trees with a hard, even force that made the branches groan. When the dining room window shattered with a sound like a dish breaking underwater, I sat up. The house went quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator. Then the wind returned in a higher, thinner register. I stood in the hallway and felt ridiculous for being scared. That fear evaporated when the barn roof tore off like someone flipping a page. I went to the front window and put my nose to the glass. That's when the beam came. It wasn't lightning. Lightning is fast. Lightning leaves you arguing with the darkness about what you missed. This was a column of light that materialized from the clouds and hung, as if a bright auger had bored through the sky and stopped before reaching ground. The whole house shook. The pain pulsed against my face twice with a faint tremble. The beam collapsed on itself like a curtain dropped. Outside, the wind died as if cut on a switch. Downstairs, the radio on the counter burst alive with static. It was an old unit. Cream case. A fat dial. The station was pure noise. I turned it off. No change. I unplugged it. The static grew louder. The fabric of it made of equal parts seashell and whisper. I dropped the plug, stepped back, and then something else took the air from my chest. The front door opened and shut. It shut too hard. It was a sound I had never heard in our house. My parents never slammed doors. The hush afterward felt like a person holding their breath in a closet. I ran to my room, shut the door, and threw my weight into the lock. If I had known anything about courage then, I might have held my post. But courage is complicated at 10. I crawled under the bed until my shoulder grazed the wall and my chest thudded against the dusty floorboards, and I tried to quiet my lungs. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Heavy. The door didn't open so much as peel. The jamb split. The knob pinwheeled across the floor. From the shadow of the bed, I saw boots. The boots were my father's. The relief, the joy, arrived in the same shock that told me something was wrong. My father stood there, not looking at me, but at the window. His eyes were clouded. He had a crusted stripe of blood from one nostril to his collar. His hands hung loose in a way I had never seen. I whispered his name. He did not answer. His mouth moved. Nothing came out. The light on the nightstand flickered even though my hand was nowhere near the chain. A single tear slid down his cheek. He turned and walked out. A second later, the front door opened and closed. Softer this time. I didn't follow. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the kitchen floor, my back against a cabinet. Wind-borne grit had made rings across the linoleum where glass shards landed. Almost perfect circles that nested like a target. The old radio sat toppled in the middle of those circles, still emitting a low, intermittent hiss. By morning, my grandmother had me in her Buick with a blanket around my shoulders. She kept her hand on my knee the whole drive to her apartment off 19th. She was a Lutheran with a razor for a tongue when pressed and a deep, common sense faith the rest of the time. She told me we would find them. We did not. I made it through school with the minimum number of damaged edges. It's amazing how much you can hide under the costume of a quiet boy who does his homework and keeps his hair modest. When I was 19, a farm near Cornelius made the paper because a field of wheat had flattened itself overnight into a set of interlocking rings and corridors that there wasn't room to mow. The image was black and white in the paper. The circles took my breath. Not because of their geometry, but because of their resemblance to what the glass and dust had done to our floor. I told myself it was coincidence. I saved the clipping anyway. I didn't set out to become obsessed. Obsession is a road with a shoulder that looks like curiosity through most of its length. I started cutting out articles, squinting at microfiche, filing under weather and anomaly and missing. I found storms that came and went like theater cues. I found cows emptied of their insides. Blood left nowhere. I found patterns drawn by someone who knew how to draw lines between things. And then I met Paige. It was not a meeting you would write for a movie. A friend of mine dragged me to a community center talk from a former Air Force radar tech who claimed he had seen something. The room smelled like coffee held too long in a steel pot. A handful of men in caps and women with 3-ring binders sat on folding chairs. The talk was less than the brochure promised. In the back, a woman in a parka and cordless headphones typed without looking at the screen, her brow knitting when the speaker got his dates wrong. Afterward, while people lined up to share their experiences, she asked me if the radar tech had used the right abbreviation for geomagnetic K indices. I said he had not. She smiled like I'd passed a test she wasn't sure I knew I was taking. Her name was Paige Laramie. Her brother had disappeared 2 towns south around the time my parents did. She had been the one who remembered the weather that night with the precision of a person counting pills. She liked astronomy, the ugly persistence of failed experiments, and first-person games where you walk through a house and try to understand what happened there. She worked remote for a software outfit in Beaverton, and she had a habit of giving herself good projects when the paid work was dull. She could find records that shot past the public search box most of us accept as the universe. Some of that was knowing how to ask. Some of it was lines I didn't want to see her cross and did. We didn't become a couple, though everyone assumed we would. I loved her with the kind of loyalty a man has to the person who stands in the rain with him without making him explain. She loved me in the way a person loves someone who brings the right map to a place that can kill you. We didn't say the other words. We didn't plan to. That is its own kind of mistake. We built a map of 20 years of weird. We put pins in a screen and drew a circle around the densest cluster. The way a tourniquet is drawn. The circle fell deep in the coast range where the trees stack on each other until light has to fight to get down. We went out one Saturday in her old pickup, more as a dare than an expedition. The road ran beside the Wilson River, cold and green where the light reached it. We almost missed the sign. It hung at the mouth of a cut in the rock, half covered in moss, the paint flaking to bare aluminum. It read, Geodetic Research Area. Unauthorized entry prohibited. The bottom edge had a decal with my father's company name. The font unmistakable. We didn't go in that day. She said we needed gear. I said we needed to think. We agreed to both and did neither. Back on the beach, with the tide curling in and the first faint wash of green hinting above the headland, I finished my story in the only way I knew how. I lied. No, we never went. I told the group. It was probably an abandoned shaft with nothing but rotten timbers and rocks. We told ourselves mysteries were kinder when left undisturbed. The lie sat in my mouth like a coin. I standing up felt like stepping off a boat. I said I needed a walk. The sky took a deeper cast, a soft emerald smear that made everyone stand and point. When the light brightens where it should be dark, there is a small part of the brain that yelps even as the eyes move toward it. I lay down in the tall grass beyond the dune, the stalks clicking together. The aurora swam and thinned and thickened. You could hear the low talk of the waves and an occasional laugh from behind me. Then nothing but the hush of a world turning under the lights. We went to the shaft the next morning. You cannot show up with a hangover, Paige said as she drove west out of town, her eyes on the line between sun and shade in the Tulane. If you throw up in a rock tube, I'm not dragging you out. I'm here, I said. I'm fine. You're not fine, she said, not unkindly. But we do more good when we're honest. We had helmets with lamps mounted, cheap walkie-talkies, a coil of rope, leather gloves, 2 head nets for the bats if we needed them, and a pistol that had been her father's, unloaded and locked in a box. She had taught me how to handle it the week before, in the canyon above Kesey, shooting at bottles placed on stumps. I was bad at it. I didn't want to be good. We parked 50 yards up the road and walked the rest. At the mouth, the air that came out of the earth was cool the way a cellar is cool. Around the scree, something sprawled in the brush, black where it shouldn't be. What we took for a mossy log was not a log. It was a cow, or what had been a cow. The belly was open neatly as a sleeve. The insides were gone. Not messy gone. Not the way coyotes leave a lesson, but gone the way a surgeon removes. The eyes were dark holes with the edges cauterized. A blue gel oozed from the slack jaw, the color of a sports drink left in a freezer too long. Small white larvae stirred in the hollow places. The smell pushed salt into the back of my tongue. We don't have time to get sick, Paige said. She didn't look away, but she folded something over herself. It wasn't denial. It was a postponement she used sparingly and well. The tunnel ran straight for 40 yards and curved to the right where the old timbers sagged in a familiar arc. The floor was damp with a slick that came off on your palms like limestone milk. The sound of rats started somewhere ahead and ricocheted back. You could think a lot of things if you gave your mind permission. We didn't. We checked our headlamps against the walkie static. We proceeded. At 100 meters, when the smell of the first cavern reached us, the floor pinched down. The rock above shouldered toward rock below. The only way forward was on all fours. Then on your belly. We shined ahead. The segment was short. The kind of pinch that stubborn rock makes when water takes another route. Paige clipped the rope to her belt and went first. She liked to go first. I let her. I don't know if that was chivalry or cowardice. In the folklore of men, it can be both. She was halfway through when water somewhere beyond made a small sound. That was all. A right foot pushing into a shallow pool. We both froze. Was that you? Her voice came, small and steady, from the dark. Before I could answer, her ankles jerked. She dug her elbows and palms into the rock. I saw her face in the swing of my lamp. It had the color of a paper plate. She got one hand back toward me. I grabbed it. The rope went taut behind her. Whoever or whatever held her leg pulled with a power that made it clear that power didn't think it would ever be opposed. She slid away. My fingers slipped. It took 6 seconds to lose her. There are deeper accounts and harder metaphors for grief. None of them changed that number. I came through on a breath that scraped my throat raw. The cavern beyond was high enough to stand and wide enough to confuse. The light fell in wedges from slits in the ceiling. The ground sloped toward an oval of black water, polished to an impossible stillness. Something hit my back. I went forward and my chin bounced off rock. A knee found the small of my back. Hands searched for my neck. I got my fingers around a jagged stone and shoved it backward as hard as I could. The weight shifted. I rolled. The pistol lay by my pack where it had fallen. My hand closed on it on a set of instructions laid down by someone else. I fired once because the sound of the word no in my head was louder than the hum that lived in that place. Silence followed like an insult. The man at my feet made a wet sound. He was a man. There was stubble on his jaw and a scar like stitching that ran across his scalp from ear to ear. His eyes were open in an expression I had only seen on the faces of deer on the side of a highway when you go past too fast to help. He wasn't one of them. Not in the way we meant that term. He was someone like me. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. I did what people do when they cannot file something. I put it on the floor of my mind and stepped around it. The pool's surface pulled at itself in a way that made the brain itch. When I pushed my fingers into it, my hand slipped through without friction and came out dry. The skin tingled like I had put it to sleep and woken it up wrong. On the other side of the water, a corridor opened with walls too smooth and too uniform to be purely natural. The light that lit it could not be placed. If I had turned around, I would have brought Paige home. This is the lie hope tells the guilty. I didn't turn around. I went forward because that is what a person does when they cannot forgive themselves for letting go of a hand in the dark. The tunnel widened into a chamber where glass segments curved together into a single wall. Behind the near-opaque surface, things were stacked with the care of an archivist. Miners' helmets flecked with rust. Coats that looked cut for men with longer arms than mine. Cloth bundles that were hair. Bones in orderly rows. The human body makes a limited number of shapes when it is torn apart, and those shapes tend to echo. I moved down the gallery and refused, with an effort that left me trembling, to ask myself what system this display obeyed. The next space hissed like a kettle under the stove. White crystals rose in hedgehog columns, each coated in a crust of calcite that made them look dusted with flour. The air smelled of sulfur and a sweetness that should not have had a name. The sound of my boots on the rocks sounded like I was further away than I was. I stepped through and almost stepped back. It was not a wall. It was something grown against the rock. It was red with variation, the way raw muscle is red, threaded with veins that pulsed with a timing that was almost but not quite the timing of a heart. Inside, within the translucent layers, figures floated. They were hairless. Tubes ran to them. Their eyes were open. I knew one of the hands before I knew the face. The hand had a scar on the middle finger where a goat pulled at a wedding band a decade and a half ago. I remember the joke my father made and how my mother had smiled at him without turning her head. I put my palm to the film. It was warm. My mother's eyes did not move. The lab came after that. A wide oval with a ceiling that was a perfect ellipse. I knew about ellipses because my father taught me at the kitchen table, drawing one with 2 pins and a loop of string, and making me see how the sum of the distances to the foci never changed. The machines were not machines I knew. Some glowed. Some had surfaces that looked like they were made to be pressed with a part of a body that did not exist. The table in the center was ordinary enough. Paige was on it. She was strapped down with a material that looked like bandage and metal at once. She arched. It is a terrible thing to see someone in pain exerting more strength to keep from screaming, because they believe making less noise may keep them alive longer. I brought the gun up and stepped. The sound came like a string being tightened and never released. It wasn't in my ears so much as in my teeth. Warm wet spilled from my nose and into my mouth. Metallic and viscous. I fell. A shape moved above her. If it had been a smear on the side of a milk truck, I would have named the features. The truth is I did not know where to put it. The skull was oversized. The skin drawn until it mapped every rib. Red growths swelled and deflated at the side of the neck. They touched her with a precision that felt like dissection and mercy both. That thought is obscene. It is also what I saw. I would have died if someone had not lifted me as if I weighed nothing. The smell of lichen on a field jacket. A shoulder like the floor of a porch where you once fell asleep safe after mowing the lawn. I told myself anything to stop from believing that I knew the person carrying me. Then the light came. This is not a metaphor. It was brightness with a texture. The way snow is bright at midnight. My body felt like it split. I had the sense that I took a step without legs. Then I was cold and on concrete. And a day had become another day, and then a week. And memory had copied itself with loss. When I could sit up without the world slamming sideways. I was in the basement of my childhood home. There were still labels under glass jars on the shelves where my father kept specimens. Basalt. Chert. Agate. A circle had been chalked on the floor with inner rings and symbols I could not place. In my hand lay a crystal. It glowed green from the inside for the length of a breath, and the light failed. In my coat pocket was a small, leather-bound book. The cover had been oiled until it was soft and dark. It was my father's field journal. I did not open it. I could not bear one more clue. I did the thing I should have done before we went. I called someone. I called Paige's father. I told him what I could. In the same syntax a man uses when he tries to tell a fireman what he left upstairs. He listened. He did not tell me I was crazy. He called the sheriff because that is what men like him do instead of crying. They searched the shaft and the adjacent hills for 6 days. They brought dogs. They brought divers for pools that did not look large enough to drown a cat. They put a tent over the mouth of the mine and made the space light with generators through the night. They found an unlicensed firearm discharged. They found a dead man with a scar along his scalp. They did not find a lab. They did not find a wall of red. They did not find Paige. They found me. They asked the questions that men with badges ask because they have to and because they want to bring someone home that they failed to bring home 2 days ago. I told them the truth and more truth. The psychiatrist the county used for court appearances told them that my account reflected a psychotic break triggered by grief and guilt. He used gentler words, but the invoices had codes enough. A judge signed papers that said I needed help. I became a patient in a brick building whose oldest wing had windows made to open only as far as 2 fingers. I learned the schedule of the place the way you learn the tides. I took what they gave me because saying no to pills is the same as saying no to your right to be believed tomorrow. My grandmother came twice a week. She brought me oranges in a mesh bag and news about whose son got into which union. When she left, she would walk to the end of the hall and stand at a window and look out at a tree. It was the same tree every time. I think this is what hope looks like when you get old. You inventory what will be there whether or not you can stand to see it. That is not the end of this story. For months after they admitted me, a storm rolled through the valley with a signature I saw before I heard. The sky over Salem went green. Not neon, but the deep, bruised shade a wine bottle has when you lift it against the light. It lasted 7 minutes. The power flickered at the hospital. The backup kicked on. In the ward, the intercom stuttered. A radio left on a desk in the nurse's station filled with a sound like the ocean trying to remember a song. The other patients howled, and then, for an instant, fell quiet. I could not stop the trembling. It felt like fear. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. A man came during visiting hours the next day. He wore a badge that said he inspected buildings for the state, which was true, but not the first truth. His jacket had a thread pulled at one cuff. He put my father's field journal on the table between us. He said he had been a friend of my father's before the company's last contract. He didn't ask how I had ended up with the book. He said he had been asked to deliver a message. He never said by whom, and I never made him say it. Evan, he said. He knew my name. There are things you will not be able to convince anyone to see. That will not make them less true. But you may be able to put one corner of the truth where it can't be moved. He told me they had dug at the shaft after the searchers left, with equipment that could shiver the ground. They found a section of the tunnel that had collapsed and a space beyond that was not on any map. In that space, they found a panel with a surface like glass. On the panel, etched with something that burned rock without cracking it, was a name. Not my mother's name. Not my father's. It was pages. Not complete. Not like a signature. 3 letters. Pi. The 4th carved line aborted. As if the person who made it had been forced to stop or had chosen to leave the rest to someone who understood. This is not proof. A voice in me said, it is not science. It is a story. But the world moves on stories. And some stories move more than others. The inspector left. He took the book with him because I asked him to. I do not know all the places it went. And I do not need to know. I know what came back without a return address 2 weeks later with a typed sheet inside, and a rock the size of my palm wrapped in brown paper. The sheet contained a set of coordinates and a series of numbers and pairs. And when I looked at them long enough, something in me relaxed. The pairs were distances and bearings. The kind you use to set a traverse across a property. The coordinates marked my grandmother's porch. The last line said, when you are ready to come home, walk the lines. I did not break out of the hospital and climb a fence and vanish into the woods. This is not a story that needs romance where respect belongs. I asked my doctor what I needed to do to leave. I did those things. I slept. I ate. I spoke about my grief without screaming. I took medication and told the truth about how it made me slow and flat. I walked in the yard and did not fight when the light above the basketball hoop buzzed. I waited 2 seasons and a month. They saw that I was not a danger to myself. They let me go. My grandmother met me at the curb in a cardigan and white sneakers. She cried and said it made her mad that the candy machine in the lobby still took a quarter but gave out stale nuts. She let me sleep in the den. She woke me the next morning the way she did when I was 10, quietly and at the door, with the smell of coffee coming ahead of her like an old friend. When the sun moved to the right angle in the afternoon, we walked to the edge of her porch and I set the compass and took the first bearing. The backyard dropped into a wedge of alder and blackberry. Somewhere neighbors set a table on a deck. You could hear the cutlery and a laugh. I walked the lines. Across the yard. Through the trees. Up the cemetery's back fence. Past the high school baseball diamond where a boy practiced alone and did not stop to see who was crossing his outfield. Through a man's side yard who was too surprised to shout. Out to the road where a ditch overflowed with runoff and into a tract where the foundations ran like unhealed bones under a new layer of construction. Along the berry field. Up the hill where you could see the fields of the experimental farm beyond. Down again until I reached a cedar on the edge of a ravine with the right shape to its trunk and the right line of sight to the ridge beyond. The numbers ended. The rock went suddenly heavy in my pocket. I took it out. It was the green crystal. I had not asked how it had traveled. The question felt ungenerous. It pulsed in my hand once. I did not believe in talismans. I do not now. I lined up the trunk and the ridge and the angle given. I saw where I had to go. It took 3 days. I cannot tell you every turn. I can tell you that the shaft did not look like an exit when I found it, but like the place a man might go to apologize to a hole. There was no sign, no warning, no gate. There was a smell like cold metal and rich earth. I stepped in. The dark did not feel like punishment this time. It felt like something keeping me honest. I will spare you. There are chambers, and there are choices, and there are places where the rock remembers your name when you put your hand on it, and there are places that do not know you and do not care. I came to a wall that made light the way ice makes a view on a January morning. It had not been there before. Or it had, and I had had the wrong eyes. I pressed the crystal to the wall. The hum came, and then stopped and my teeth unclenched. A seam opened. Silent as breath. There was no lab beyond. There was a small room. A table made of something that looked like stone until you looked at it. On the table, a book. Not my father's. This one had a cover like a cutting board used only once. Next to it lay a single strand of hair tied with blue thread. The hair was dark, the color of pages. There was no blood. There were no straps. The wall opposite showed nothing but rock. The room had in it exactly enough to fill me with a sensation I had never had, and hope is not the right name for it. It was acceptance without surrender. When you spend your life looking for monsters, you can make monsters out of men who are lost. When you spend your life doubting every kindness, you can make cruelty out of mistakes. I stood in that room until my legs ached and my mouth went dry because the only right thing to do was stand long enough to let the easy lies drain away. Then I took the book. I took the hair. I walked out the way I had come, the rock closing behind me without a sound, the surface looking like rock and nothing else. Because that is what rock knows to be. The ending that satisfies is not the one where I pull Paige from a machine and carry her into daylight while a helicopter lands nearby. The ending that satisfies is the one where a man decides what he owes the living and the dead and then pays it. We held a service at the Lutheran church on a street. We didn't lie. We said we didn't have a body. We said we had a promise. We put her name on a plaque next to the names of 2 fishermen and a boy who drowned in a quarry the year before I was born. We brought sandwiches and coffee to the hall and told stories about the way she typed without looking and the way she made everyone who stood next to her seem more themselves. Her father asked me if I was going to stay. I said yes. The journal that had not been my father's turned out to be a log. It wasn't human in its origin. It was not entirely not human either. The entries were not words so much as numbers that were the picture of words. If you have walked a property line with a smart woman who carries a plaid in her head, you already know that language prefers shape when it can. It took me a winter and a spring to see the entries rightly. When I did, I saw the story written there, not conquest, not mercy, not even harvest. Work, ongoing, necessary to someone else's survival, indifferent to ours. You can be crushed by indifference or freed by it. You can take the part of the truth that is yours to carry and set it where it can be seen. You can build a life around that motion. I work now for a surveyor who got his license the year I graduated high school. I drive metal pins into soil where a developer wants to know where the law will let him stop. I take my grandmother to breakfast every other Sunday and listen to her talk about her knees. On clear nights, when the forecast hints, I go down to the bay and watch for green. Sometimes other people are there with blankets and a single cheap beer each. Sometimes I am alone and I count boats. I am not cured. I am not broken. I am a man who once let go of a hand in the dark and then learned how to hold on to other things long enough that their weight changed shape. If you have listened this far, you know why I told it. It isn't to convince anyone with a yard sign to change it. It isn't to make the newspaper amend a column it printed a decade ago. It's to lay my piece of the truth where it can sit in the light, and to invite you to lay yours near it. Tell me what you think about what happened under that hill. Tell me whether you believe a person can be forced into violence without choosing it, and whether that removes their responsibility. Tell me what justice would be in a world where most of the forces acting on us do not love or hate us, but do their work without concern for our names. Tell me what you would carry out of that room if you walked into it and found what I found. And tell me, especially, what you think is owed to those who go missing into systems bigger than blame, and to the ones who come back and have to live in the aftermath. The comments are open. Say what you believe about violence and about injustice. Take a clear stand. I will read every word.